huge void, a huge gap between what the policymakers are talking about here in Paris and what very clearly comes out of the science on climate change. We had, over the last few years, we've had the IPCC report, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report, and they very clearly have laid out a carbon budget for that's the total amount of carbon dioxide we can emit into the atmosphere for a 2 degrees C rise in global average temperatures. Now, those carbon budgets should be informing the policy process here in Paris, but they very clearly are not. What's happened here is that each country has submitted its own voluntary contribution as to what it thinks it can deliver in terms of reducing carbon dioxide emissions. And when you add those up, then you get a level of temperature that's probably much nearer 3.5 to 4 degrees C rise by the end of the century. So what we are seeing is a real disconnect between what the science is saying on climate change and what the policymakers are talking about here. And one of the ways that this disconnect is being masked, it's been hidden, is by a particular suite of technologies that are often referred to as negative emission technologies. These are speculative technologies that do not exist at the moment for effectively removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, sucking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, liquefying that carbon dioxide, then storing it away underground somewhere for many thousands of years so it is not released back into the atmosphere. And these technologies do not exist. They're expected to come to be able to work by, say, 2050 to 2070, and that means basically that we can carry on doing things almost business as usual like we are today, with the knowledge that at some point in the future we can actually solve the climate problem by sucking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. And that particular technique is what allows policymakers that are talking here to say it is broadly consistent with the science. But if you hold a view that you think it is dangerous to rely on a speculative technology in 3 or 4 decades from now to solve the problem, then the challenge becomes much more political and economic. We are talking then about very dramatic reductions in our levels of emissions and how we live our lives today. And that is a political and economic implication for how particularly the wealthy of us live our lives. 50% of global emissions come from 10% of the population. And we would have to make very dramatic changes to the way we live our lives, to how we do our work, to how we enjoy our pleasure time and so forth, if we are serious about 2 degrees centigrade. And if we're really blunt about this, people like me and people like the negotiators here, we're not prepared to put those sorts of changes in place, and therefore we will rely on these negative emission technologies in the future.